This is chapter 12, recording number 3. We're talking about shock and how it progresses now. So there's really two main stages. You've got compensated shock. This is kind of those early stages where the body can still compensate and keep homeostasis relatively close. Some signs and symptoms: agitation, anxiety. They feel this impending sense of doom, pale, cool, clammy. You might start getting some cyanosis or some bluing around the lips and the fingertips. They're typically short of breath. They're thirsty. They have a narrow pulse pressure. And then they progress, if they're not treated appropriately, into decompensated shock. So now all of a sudden, their body can't keep up with what's going on. So their blood pressure starts falling at this point. We don't want to wait until a patient's blood pressure decreases to actually identify them as being in shock. We want to catch it way earlier than that, because once they get to that point, their body's not able to compensate anymore. They may be ashen, mottled, or have fully cyanotic skin, thready, absent peripheral pulses, poor urinary output. Basically, their body just isn't keeping up anymore. When shock has progressed too far, no matter what you do, you can't fix the patient. It is irreversible. When the patient has actually reached that point, there's no way to adequately assess because the body starts shutting down. So it's absolutely imperative that you realize that your patient is in shock and treat them aggressively to keep them from going down that path. Blood pressure may be the last measurable factor to change in shock. So if you get to that point, they're well into shock. And this is particularly true within kids and infants. Kids compensate so well. They really do. They compensate for a long time, but when they start transitioning over to decompensation, they absolutely nosedive. By the time that a blood pressure actually falls in an infant or a child, they're so close to death, and it's really, really hard to save them. So we need to start early. You want to expect shock in many situations and pre-treat for it. Even if your patient's not showing signs of shock, there's some simple things you can do as part of shock management that won't hinder your ability to take care of that patient, but you're kind of thinking ahead. You should suspect shock if the patient has multiple severe fractures, an abdominal or chest injury, a spinal injury, a severe infection, a major heart attack, or anaphylaxis. Start treating them right up front so you don't have to worry about them going down that path. When you're assessing a patient for shock, we all start the same way. It's scene safety. Make sure that you're alert to potential hazards. Make sure that you're looking around for mechanism of injury or nature of illness so that you can decipher before you even get to the patient if there's a chance for shock to develop. Then we're going to our primary assessment. Remember, primary assessments, you're looking for level of consciousness and you're looking for life threats. So determine that level of consciousness. Somebody that's completely with it typically isn't progressed in shock yet. That's one of the things that starts decreasing is level of consciousness. If they're a little bit confused, a little bit sleepy, if they're agitated, they may be progressing there. But if they're completely with it, I'm not overly worried right then. But we want to determine our life threats. We go through the A, the B, and the C. And any of those, if there's a problem with any of them, they need fixed right away. And then that will help you determine your priority of transport. If they have massive hemorrhage, life-threatening bleeding, or a problem with A, B, and C, they are priority transport. So what do we do? How do we assist as an EMT? Well, you're going to provide high-flow oxygen to try and assist in perfusion. They've got red blood cells going, or they're maybe losing them. So the one that they have, we want to make sure that we get some extra oxygen on board to try and help them out. You want to request ALS as necessary to help with more aggressive shock management. As an EMT, you can't provide IV fluids. and that may be what they need. So you can always cancel ALS, but on a patient that you suspect may go into shock, go ahead and get them rolling and then figure out if you truly need them. Your general impression of the patient. So this is your, do they look sick? Do they not look sick? And you'll get to the point if you do this for a career path. You'll walk in and you'll get a feeling of somebody, whether they're sick or they're not sick, or there's some of those people where you're kind of on the fence about, and so you tend to treat a little more aggressively. You'll get there. Airway, breathing, circulation. As part of that circulation, we do look for excessive bleeding that needs to be fixed if it causes a threat to the patient's life. Most bleeding is not going to be severe. If they have minor wounds, we're not worried about that during our primary assessment. We're worrying about life-threatening bleeding. We're checking that pulse. If your pulse is rapid, if it's weak, if it's strong, that's going to give you some clues to how your patient is doing. History taking, you're going to investigate the chief complaint, obtain that sample history. That's extremely important. For trauma patients, we're more doing find it and fix it sort of care. You find an injury, you try and fix it. If you can't fix it, you drive fast. When you're talking more about a medical patient, it's all history based. You have to get that chief complaint. You have to obtain that sample. You have to obtain that OPQRST mnemonic and get more information so that you really know what's going on with your patient. Then we're going to do the secondary assessment. Oftentimes you're going to start and repeat that primary assessment just to make sure that you didn't forget anything. And then you're going to kind of focus in on what systems are affected. If they've been in a trauma, we do a head to toe to make sure that we don't accidentally miss anything. We're going to obtain a baseline set of vitals. If they are unstable, we're going to reassess their vital signs at least every 5 minutes. If they're relatively stable, you can go 10 to 15 minutes in between. You want to make sure that you are using your monitoring devices to look at their oxygen and circulatory status. So having a pulse ox on kind of helps give you a quick glance at that. When you reassess vital signs, any interventions that you have provided for the patient, and then their response to those interventions. You want to keep checking their chief complaint, make sure that nothing else has cropped up, keep identifying and reassessing ABCs, because they can go downhill. Just because they were good at the beginning doesn't mean that your patient won't change. And then mental status as well. If at any point you get to the point where your patient has had a severe change in any of these things, then you're going to want to start at the beginning because you essentially have a new patient. You want to continue to determine what interventions are needed for your patient. Focus on supporting the cardiovascular system when it comes to shock. Provide oxygen very early and relatively aggressively. If somebody's in shock, we're not giving them 2 liters on a nasal cannula. And keep the patient warm. There's a lot of physiologic reasons for why we do this, and going into it completely would be above and beyond for this class. It sounds ridiculous, but seriously, you don't want a patient that's in shock to get cold. So keep them warm. It really, really, really is important. As soon as you recognize shock, you need to begin treating it. You're going to follow your standard precautions. And then you want to control all obvious external bleeding. There's a difference between life-threatening bleeding and just bleeding. So life-threatening bleeding, try and control it with a dry, sterile dressing. Secure that with bandages. Or if you need to, you can put a tourniquet on proximal to the bleeding site. So remember, that's closer toward the body. And we'll go over that in class as well. Make sure the patient has an open airway. Maintain manual inline stabilization if they have a suspected neck or back injury or head injury. Try and comfort the patient, keep them calm. The more upset that they get, the quicker they're going to progress into shock. We never let our patients eat or drink anything unless they're evaluated by a physician, except in the case of hypoglycemia. When we're talking just about shock, we don't give them anything to eat or drink. If spinal immobilization is indicated, the patient goes on the backboard. A backboard is considered a full body splint. So if they have a broken arm, broken leg that is not bleeding massively, I'm not going to worry about it until we get them on the backboard. Remember that inadequate ventilation may be a major factor in the development of shock. So provide oxygen, monitor the patient's breathing, and assist with ventilations if you need to. If they're unconscious, you may or may not need to provide an airway adjunct as well. Place blankets under and over the patient. If you're lying them down on a cold surface, it doesn't really matter if you're putting a blanket over top of them. They're still losing heat posteriorly. Put one down, put them on it, put a blanket over top of them. Backboards are cold. Backboards pull out heat, so you might need to consider putting something on the backboard to keep them from getting cold. Consider ALS or air transport if you need to. Accurately record the patient's vital signs every 5 minutes throughout treatment and transport. If they're in shock, they have a problem with A, B, or C, we're definitely going to assess them every 5. How to treat cardiogenic shock. So if they're in shock because of a heart attack and they just can't generate the necessary power to pump blood throughout the system, there's really not a whole lot that we can do in the field, truly. We don't want to give them nitroglycerin, first and foremost, if they're hypotensive. So remember that nitro has that minimum blood pressure. If they're in cardiogenic shock, their blood pressure is dropping already, we're not going to give them nitro on top of it. They may be having chest pain. They may have taken their own nitroglycerin. If that's the case and they're hypotensive, call for ALS. If they have chronic lung disease on top of cardiogenic shock, then they're not going to be doing so great because that can actually compound it and make it way worse. Other signs and symptoms, if they have a weak irregular pulse, cyanosis around the lips and under the fingernail beds, anxiety, nausea, the best thing that you can do is transport. So you want to provide high flow oxygen to these patients. You want to assist ventilations as necessary. Make sure that you have suction nearby if they're already nauseous. You don't want to find out that your suction is in a bag or back out in the rig when they actually start vomiting. You want to make sure that you have that prepped ahead of time. You want to transport immediately. If ALS isn't on the scene when you are recognizing cardiogenic shock, go ahead and call them. Try and place the patient in a position of comfort and try and calm them down. Even if they're having a heart attack, you want to keep them as calm as possible because that could have an effect on their outcome. You don't want to continue to amp them up because that just increases the myocardial oxygen demand because their heart's going to be beating faster. And if they're not getting adequate perfusion, it's just a sliding scale from there. Go ahead and stop here.